What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the Glass Blaster here, and we are back with episode 125 of the video game therapy series. It's been a few days, as per usual. I don't really even attempt to stick to any kind of schedule with this, just because I know I won't keep to it. I mean, in theory, I could, but it's just, no offense to my 5 listeners, but this series is not really a priority to me. It's kind of an ad hoc thing that is good for me when I feel like it. And so yeah. Anyway, I was about to get on an airplane the other day, and I was just kind of thinking about these heroic moments, and it I don't know, because you don't really know when these I even think about it in the eyes of like the press or something, or anyone who would. You don't really know when these heroic moments that you might have are, or even so, like what I'll say, even what narrative arises from these certain moments that happens. And I was thinking, like, if I'm on this plane that in the grand scheme of my life is not like a significant plane ride. It's just a kind of a plane ride. I'm hoping to take many more. I guess by the choice to teleport instead of going through TSA, I probably would. But regardless, it's not like this is a significant moment and something worthy of what I would say is the ultimate sacrifice. So, for example, if there came some situation, I'm not even sure what would happen. Maybe there's a terrorist or something. I don't know. Pure 9/11 style. Something would happen on there, and I basically had to sacrifice my life for this, for someone else or for the whole plane. Which again, in the grand scheme of things, for me is an insignificant plane ride, but would have ultimately been, my last one in the last act I did. Period. Um, which I think most people, in that situation, perhaps even myself included, would hesitate to, I guess, kind of be this hero in a moment that feels otherwise insignificant. And I think it is different than what you might see in movies and things because, obviously there's a lot of framing that goes around these big moments in movies, and it's like people are very aware of the sacrifice that the protagonist or, I guess a protagonist, if there's multiple, is about to make, in the context of this movie. So then, there's obviously a lot of pressure and there's like moments and moments and, perhaps sometimes even, even like hours sometimes, even within the movie that the protagonist has a choice of whether or not to do like the righteous thing or like maybe the selfish thing. Whereas in real life, not only is that even just like a split second decision or like an instinct, but also you don't even know whether you'll get like, the glory that comes with it. I think people, have given the opportunity to be the hero and be lauded as such, and to for them to have some certainty that they will be, I'll say, even like, you know, rewarded in the afterlife. Again, that's some kind of vague notion, with notoriety or with just, oh, this person did a good thing when they died. I think that can weigh on people's conscience whether or not to, like, I suppose, do the right thing most of the time. So like, for example, like somebody like Jesus, for example. Suppose that, like, how many other people, and I'm not gonna try to enumerate this exactly. I just mean, what if there were potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of people that thought that their sacrifice wasn't in vain, but yet like they died on a cross or died some horrific death, and no one really cares. It's like, I'm not saying that's like, yeah, sure, we praise Jesus or we thank him for, like, whatever he did. I mentioned people to go to church. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're thanking him for giving the ultimate sacrifice. But presumably, there's been hundreds of thousands of people that died for nothing, and they just kind of just died, and nobody remembers them that much. Maybe a few people remember them, but many more don't. There's kind of nameless, faceless people that just died for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't do something truly noble, equivalent to, Jesus dying on the cross. Because I even, you put me in a situation where it's like, look, you can, we'll torture you, whatever, we'll kill you, but then you'll be praised for eternity, and there'll be millions of people, billions of people throughout the world will write and read books about you, and yada yada yada. You be this, like, this all time thing, and I don't really care about the fame aspect of it, but I think if you give people like that choice, being like, oh well, I guess my legacy would live on a long time, and it'd be kind of cool to be like, the new Jesus if I died. I'm sure I'll do that. Like I'll die, I guess. Whereas I think most people like not only are they never even given the opportunity to do such a thing, but maybe they think that they are. They think that their sacrifice won't be in vain, and unfortunately, in some cases, that maybe they, no one cares. They just died for no reason, and it's just like they might have done something they thought was, laudable or noble in that moment, and it came and went, and no one thought more of it. And I guess it is kind of a duty to the living then to try to venerate, I suppose, the dead that, have made good decisions and, these kind of, times where, their legacy's made. But many more people don't even have a legacy at all. So I guess it's something to, I guess, not take for granted in that regard. But I don't know. I was just thinking about the plane and like, oh, if something terrible happens on this plane, not that I'm somebody that runs around and dreams up these horrible scenarios. But I was wondering, like, okay, well, even if like I was the hero on this plane, like, A, would anyone ever know that if like the plane still went down and everyone died? And B, like, would anyone care even? And I guess it doesn't really matter. I suppose this does kind of boil down to like are you okay with the person that you died as? So, even if you weren't going to be known as the next Jesus for doing something great and very noble and, sacrificing yourself, you know, I think maybe you can die at peace knowing that you died your death. And so maybe that's like maybe the whole end game of this whole thing is not really that you're dying for anyone else or for society or for, making any kind of sacrifice that is any more noble than just almost for the selfish reason of you, being okay with how you died and it being, I suppose, for your own, you know, I guess being able to die at peace. Which I suppose is, I guess if there truly is no afterlife of any kind, then it doesn't really matter whether you're a piece of shit and, are selfish your whole life, or if you are like this ultimate, you take a vow of poverty and, give your life for everyone else or whatever, or, live at peace with nature. I suppose that if you truly do believe in a kind of very reductionist, materialistic, you know, uh, view of life itself, then I suppose it doesn't matter at all what happens after you die, or whether you lived or died in vain or not, or, if you pleased yourself or, whatever your higher power is, during your time alive or not. I don't know. I suppose it doesn't matter. But anyway, I was also thinking about sleep, so I was a little restless last night for whatever reason. I don't know. It just kind of happens. And I kind of thought about it as like sleep being kind of like like a train that you, hope to get on every night, and it kind of takes you wherever it's going. I don't, you don't really know where it's going. I suppose you might have some, vague idea based off of the people you've interacted with and your subconscious and certain, hormones and impulses that, presumably change how you dream or what you dream about. But otherwise, to sleep, you kind of just lay down, and it is kind of weird, the whole thing. I mean, again, not to, sound like a stoner and like, oh, it's weird that we just lay down and do nothing for 8 hours a day, and that's totally normal. But it does kind of weird that you do, I suppose if you dream, which most people do, I'd say in most nights, whether they're, aware of it or not. But it is kind of just like this little train ride that you kind of get on or you hope to get on. And, as you lay there restless sometimes, you're just kind of waiting to be picked up. And you're wondering why it's late or I guess why you're still up, but you're kind of still waiting for the stop to come get you. Which is kind of how I felt last night. I just thought it was interesting to think about sleeping and dreaming as, I suppose, waiting for at a bus stop or waiting at like a train stop for the train to come and take you. And not even that you're not even really sure where you're going. You just kind of know that you need to be waiting, right? You kind of need to know that you have to do this, which is odd. We don't really, I suppose, not question it as much as other things. I feel like every other, facet of, uh, I guess, our existence isn't really questioned as much. Like people try to question like, eating and diet. So they go on like these crazy, bizarre diets, and people have this, they try to question like even like being around other people. So they try to isolate themselves. They are around people 24/7. They go like different extremes to try and like, see why we need, social interaction or why we need food or anything like that. But sleep is kind of known that we can't live without it, or I guess the lack of it, I guess causes you to go nuts or something. I mean, or you just die really at some point. Um, but it is strange that is just kind of a requirement of things. And you can make a simple biological argument and just say, well, there's, hormones we need to, rest and replenish our bodies. But like, well, okay, but theoretically, if we're designing biological systems, couldn't we design something that doesn't really need any sleep, or that can, other animals and things can sleep with one eye open, they can kind of sleep, half the time. I suppose why would like things need, to rest per se? Whereas like, a computer can run 24/7, isn't there's no requirement of sleep of any kind. And I realize that we're not computers and we don't function that way. And I've belabored that point to no end. But it's interesting to think that as biological systems, for some reason, we require like this rest. And, all of them really do. All animals in some way or the other, nothing's kind of ongoing 24/7. Everything does kind of like rest and relax and something, which is just weird, I suppose. I'm not really sure why, uh, you know, we're not alone in that as humans either. We're kind of alone in that as biological species, but not, not our genus specifically. But it's strange. I don't know, because computers don't need to rest. I suppose in the sense that they might overheat, but you could design a system that is, ongoing. For theoretically, you could design a system that wouldn't need to be, rested ever. If it's cooled properly and it's, I guess no software updates or anything like that, it could run perpetually forever, and it wouldn't ever need to rest, even in theory. Uh, you know, but there's no such thing about a biological system of any kind. There's no animal, at least no animal to my knowledge, that requires no sleep ever, or at least no form of like I'll call it like rest or anything. There's something that can be on all the time. So maybe that's just kind of like maybe one big like and it's not a very satisfying answer to as to like how maybe humans and computing systems are fundamentally different, because it is a disadvantage. You would think it's a disadvantage to have to rest, whereas a computer wouldn't have to rest; it could stay up all night. But there is something fundamentally different about something that requires rest. I'm not saying you couldn't design a program or a computer that needs rest. You could, but it wouldn't it wouldn't be inherent to a system, which maybe there's some fundamental underlying difference for that, within that. And I'm just not clever enough to see the exactly what that means. But anyway, um, yeah, I guess the other thing about I mentioned passing on it in passing earlier that I probably could commit to some kind of regular cadence with this, and say that like I have to post twice a week or do whatever. And this has been kind of a common theme throughout, I guess was many of I'll say commitments in my life, where it's not that I don't commit to things, or I think I'm okay at saying no and like not doing things that I don't think are worth my time. But I'm never, I haven't been like, I'll say just like uber committed to stuff where like I just go crazy hard and I'm like, absurdly dedicated with things. I suppose, the exception might be like with, exercising. I'd say I'm pretty religious about that. But, with like, diets and things that I've gone on, it's not like, I'm probably like 80% at least or 90%. I'm even with these, like it's been a few years now and I still make these, but I'm not like grinding this every day. And it's not like my full time job is to make these stupid videos, for good reason. Obviously, they don't net me any, ability to support myself. I suppose emotionally, maybe they do, but besides that, that's not really, it's not worth anything. But I've noticed that I kind of am able to commit enough to stuff, like a partial commitment, but not one that is like I'll say like a satisfying, or one that's like he's really dedicated to. It's just more so like, well, he's kind of still kicking. It's almost like the equivalent of being like a cockroach in the sense where I just as a cockroach, as a species, cockroaches are known for their ability just to kind of like to dwell and survive even like in harsh conditions, and they'll just kind of be around forever. And they're not going to be an apex predator, I suppose. That'd be terrifying. But they're just kind of around. And they're just kind of hard to kill. And maybe that is kind of my modality of going about things. Because like with this, the series is still going. It's on on over 120 episodes, which is pretty good. But it isn't like I'm posting every day and growing it and doing any kind of evangelical work and making it any larger than what it was when it started. If anything, is just as humble, if not more so than it was, when I began the whole series. And same even with like, not only this stuff, but just other things in my life. I've noticed that I just kind of do enough. Even like the blog I have, I'm still posting stuff. It's, on blog. I'm on number 100, I think, but it isn't like, I might get a post or two out a week, which again isn't kind of any kind of impressive cadence. It's not like I'm pumping them out or anything. I'm not like a prolific, producer. I'm just kind of just doing enough to, like, still call it like, oh, he's still doing it, but he's not like, I don't know. And maybe that never calls for, I guess, being impressed. No one's really impressed with just kind of something that's like barely alive, but like still there. But again, no one's kind of impressed, biologically with the existence of a cockroach. But in some ways, it is kind of impressive that they, weather the storms and have found ways to just kind of dwell and be there. And, I don't know. Not to liken my approach to things as a cockroach, because that's not really how I want to see myself. But I suppose that might be one way of framing it. That isn't, you know, I don't know. But anyway, now I have more rants about just culture in general, because that is something that just irks me, especially just being out in the wild. And as much as complaining is nice, because it does kind of, I guess, liberate me in some ways. It makes me feel a little bit better knowing that I can just have gotten my thoughts out into the void. But I still kind of come back to a solution mindset, and like, what would actually solve any of these problems that I'm complaining about. And so maybe I'll try to, I suppose, entertain or think about uh, the actual solutions, or the practical, solutions to, like, to the woes I might talk about. Because I'm no shortage of ways of articulating or describing how I hate something, or something shouldn't be this way, or whatever. But what to actually do about it is the much more difficult practical thing. And often it's difficult, and maybe why I don't like bringing it up is because because then you can just get into kind of tic-tacky arguments about, like, well, there's something wrong with this approach. Well, this approach obviously wouldn't work. Well, this wouldn't work because of XYZ. And it's like, sure, you can list, thousands of reasons why something doesn't work, but ultimately, like, the answer is, and does it work better than the way it is now? And if the way things are now totally sucks, and like almost anything would be a vast improvement, then sure, like, you can still point out shortcomings in any kind of, solution, but compared to what it is now, it's much better anyway. So I don't know. I'm noticing that. I'll try to keep that in mind as I complain about things, knowing that whatever solution I pose, um, is probably, is hopefully marginally less flawed than the current, modus operandi. And I suppose there is some kind of momentum with things, so it's harder to change to something that might not even be that much more efficient, we'll say. But change nonetheless is kind of what I'm after, regardless, just because things as they are bother me. Um, anyway, I was just thinking about our culture, as I do, and it seems that we exist in this, like, this world of just accessories. That's just kind of what I see around me all the time. Everything is, obviously it's very consumerist heavy, at least here in the West, but it's all like consuming of accessories. There's not anything that is, uh, it's not consuming of essentials. It's not like people are loading up on bags of rice and cattle, and or land or something like that. And maybe there are people that are, but for the most part, people load up on, and they kind of gorge on, again, kind of like accessories in every sense of the word. So, like, like tattoos, and then there's like dolls, and there's like clothes for your dolls, and there's, little, uh, steering wheel covers. Like, what is a more meaningless purchase than a steering wheel cover? Like, why do you need, like, what, your steering wheel isn't comfortable enough, or like, unless it's made out of, something just objectively, most of them are not made of anything you need to cover it up. If it's a style choice, like, again, why? I just don't understand. And maybe I'm too much of a pragmatist when it comes to this kind of stuff, but like, I just wouldn't ever see the need, or even the remote desire, to even invest the thought into buying a steering wheel cover for my car. Like, why would that be something that even bothers me at all? You know, and much less, like, yeah, and I don't get clothes either. I think clothes, in the same way of cars, are a lot of just like a means to an end. Like, does it get the job done? Do I need to? I know there's occasions where, like, you need to have a suit, or pants or something like that, but the idea that, like, you needed to be the garb that you run around in is more important than what you do or what comes out of your mouth. I think is laughable. I don't. not to say that there aren't judgments that you can make on a person based off what they're wearing, but beyond a certain point, you shouldn't. Why should that be the focus, right? Suppose like we are this culture where, or we aspire to be a culture where you don't judge people, based off of how they look. Why is it then that fashion is so prevalent and like what we're paying attention to, right? Shouldn't we like try then to ignore what people are wearing? And it's one thing I guess if someone's running around naked, to not like make note of that. It's like, okay, this person's naked. Maybe that's not socially acceptable. That's a little odd. But otherwise, like would it make that much of a difference? The price or the brand of the pants that they're wearing, and like isn't that verbatim like judging somebody based off of how they look and on something superficial and not on the content of their character? Which is what a Lincoln quote of like let us not judge the man by the something something, but by the content of their character or something. More or less, just like uh, you know, don't judge a book by its cover, meaning don't judge a person just based on how they look, or the color of their skin. I guess he was making it in reference to race, but even more so, like, would it matter like whether I'm wearing like something furry boots or cowboy boots or Crocs or something? And I suppose there are things that do kind of, I wouldn't really respect somebody who shows up to a formal event wearing Crocs. Um, but beyond like the very basic threshold of this person's not wearing anything outlandish, I think it should be otherwise ignored what they're wearing or what they look like. So long as they're there and they're not doing something, you know, they're not saying or doing something that is then calls attention to them. I don't know. It just this the idea that it's like you can make a difference, in the world, or like it's of utter importance in what you're wearing or what you look like. Is I just don't really agree with. I don't really understand, and maybe there's more levels to it that I don't get. And I know there's people do appreciate and they love fashion, and that can be a hobby of things. But in the same way as like I don't know, it's I suppose maybe the software use might be different, but like I would judge somebody based off of the software choices that they make, only because of the implications, and the implications of like, okay, I use Windows and Mac, and that implies certain things about my computing habits. Could you say the same thing about somebody that wears hand-me-down clothes? Okay, well, sure they could be just poor. That could be one thing. So you're really going to judge them because they're poor? That doesn't seem very fair. Or if they're I guess wearing expensive stuff, is that supposed to mean that they're worth a lot of money? But what does that tell me? They have money. Well, where do they get that? I don't know. Am I supposed to assume that they, started a charity and that's why they have all this money? And it's like, well, okay, well, if they're such a nice person with all this money, why are they spending it on clothes and not more in their charity? I don't know. So again, like it to me, I don't know that the clothes that somebody's wearing or their accessories that they have are emblematic of the person that they are. Any more than like a tattoo is meaningful about a person. And sure, like maybe tattoos are meaningful to themselves, but like I don't run up to somebody and look at their tattoos and go, well, this person has X, Y, and Z tattoos, therefore means. And I don't know. I just think tattoos in general don't make any sense to me. But the idea that it's not really crazy for me to say you shouldn't judge somebody on that. So then why should you judge them based off of the price or their outfit? Or good or bad. Again, despite beyond like the senses, are they naked or is this like, are they wearing like inappropriate garb to something? Are they not wearing Crocs to a formal event? That's kind of the litmus test. So beyond like a certain point of you're wearing a ridiculous outfit to this, it should otherwise kind of be ignored. It shouldn't be important that what you're wearing is cashmere versus cotton or something. I don't know. It can be a hobby to somebody. I'm not saying it can't, but uh, I suppose it's not. It shouldn't be like representative of the person that you are. Um, I would be closer to say something like your computing habits or what you do. What kind of phone or how you use a phone you have is again more representative of the person you are. Even that being a little bit of a stretch, right? But I would still argue that that would be more representative of somebody's character in some vague sense than the amount they spent on their clothes. Which I would even say should be an inverse relationship. The more you spend on the clothes, the more foolish you seem to me. But that's just my opinion. Um, so something else that really bothers me now. So the job market, to nobody's surprise, is not great for people. People are not doing well in this in the market, I suppose, to put it one way. But a more sinister, I guess, application of all of these, quote unquote, open jobs that supposedly exist, which, by the way, whatever the numbers actually are, based off of some stupid like Indeed data, are complete horseshit. There's almost, if you told me the actual number of real jobs was like five, that would not surprise me at all. But I think the real sinister application is that people or companies had all these job postings, and then in order to get the job, you have to supply them information, which might include, your name, your address, your phone number, your email, and all this information that could then be harvested and sold, to advertising companies. So I'm even worried or concerned, and you know, I guess almost certain that this is happening, that companies, have all these open jobs, quote unquote, that they never intend to fill at all. They just kind of want a bunch of data because it also is helpful to them to have just a huge repository of, potential candidates. And maybe they are seen as actual candidates, but they could more likely be seen as, even customers to some extent. So I can imagine a company that is, struggling to make sales. Maybe their customer demographic is the same as their employment demographic. So then, oh, yip de doo, we'll just open a bunch of job postings, collect a bunch of resumes from LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever crap, and then we just harvest and sell that information. And we, add them, because they're not really following ethical guidelines with any of this crap. It's not like they're respecting the people's data and information that they give them. They're essentially using their job postings as data harvesting. It's a data harvesting platform, which I think is kind of the ultimate scum and is kind of the worst thing that you could possibly do. Because somebody has a certain, I guess, level of vulnerability and like, I need a job, to even give you information in the first place. And then it's kind of the ultimate form of mistrust to then use that as leverage against them and try to get more money out of them when they're looking for a job. They don't have any fucking money. That's why they're applying for a job in the first place. And even so, it's just like they're selling their data, to somebody, again, to try and for what, to sell them something else that they might not, certainly don't need, but they need a job. That's what they want. They don't need more shit that you're going to sell them. Um, which I'm not even, it's not even that I'm against like buying things, period. I suppose on some very basic level, I'm against, I'm kind of, you don't have to buy it. You probably shouldn't. But even so, I think, and there are things that I buy that are, notably frivolous, but it's like just the absence of quality. And there's just no like, you're just buying like plastic shit that just is crap. Like it's one thing if you're like, I suppose, you could be like somebody who collects, I don't know, like pens or something. You could collect, ancient pen. I don't even know what, collecting whatever. But like, why would you go out and buy then just like big plastic pens? Why wouldn't you like at least get the good shit? Like if you're gonna be this like, you know, this autistic guy who's, super into this, collecting whatever, don't collect like crap. Like why would you get crap? Buy the good stuff at least. Don't buy like the shit. Save up and buy like the one really, really good pen or whatever that you want. Not like, a bunch of, I mean, I suppose it really depends on what you're collecting. Even if you even call it collecting, maybe it's just buying, aimless shit. But like, buying toilet seat covers and steering wheel covers and just other random, like, it's not even, it fits in no theme, and it's just it's pointless, and it's low quality. It's not like you're, buying anything as a collecting item that, might be of high quality or of significance in any way other than just, a piece of useless crap. You're just kind of buying the same like Tupperware containers, where it's just like at some point you should just buy good china if you really need it. Don't buy more plastic shit that is, you know, it's just, it's not like, it's like one step above being disposable, but like it's not disposable, I suppose, in theory. There's an argument to buying disposable things because there is some utility to that. Is like, silverware being disposable. It's, I guess sometimes more convenient or could be cheaper than buying, silverware and having to wash it a bunch. But it's like buying something that's like a three-use item. It's like, you either buy the disposable or buy like the metal silverware. Why are you buying stuff that you can use three times? That seems stupid. It seems like it's the worst of both worlds. Like you're not even getting the benefit and the convenience of the disposable silverware or the reusability of the actual metal silverware. So why are you, don't buy that? That seems stupid. So I don't know. Anyway, let me move on to something else here. Um, let me move. Let me see if I can find something more tuned to my attitude at this moment. Yeah, I suppose this is another thing, I guess, related to, I guess, society and technology at large. Uh, I guess thinking in the realm of like technical thinking, like if you were thinking in technical terms, that only really, what I say and what I see as like respects other technical thinking. So I suppose if you're, thinking in engineering terms of, things being optimal and things being related to performance and whatever, that only really respects more performance and engineering related thinking. Whereas I think if you're, maybe somebody who's thinking about, the artistic implications or the cultural implications of something, that doesn't really jive with, uh, you know, I'll say technical thinking. And I think the rise now is, even as somebody who would call themselves a technical thinker, I think the propensity now is to only really respect and promote more technical thinking. I think technical thinking kind of has the monopoly on things now. Whereas, maybe in, 100 years ago, where people were burning witches or whatever for something, I would say that humanistic or artistic or religious thinking might have had the monopoly. I think the technical thinkers now have the monopoly, or just not even the monopoly, but like just they have most of the power when it comes to the way that culture and society and things are made, which I view as problematic. I think I am a bit more of a, uh, I guess, siding with democratic type thinking where you should have all different types of, thinking, not of equal respects, but of respects that at least balance the other out, right? We can't have a society only of, people who burn witches, for, whatever, or of people that only think in terms of engineering and optimality, because many things in the human experience are not engineering problems. They're a little bit more nuanced than that, and they require, maybe, the eye of a humanitarian or of an artist or of whoever, of somebody that isn't, again, some kind of hyper autistic, engineer. But I worry that now the hyper autistic engineer is now the only mode of thinking, and is the only kind of respected mode of thinking now, where things are all in terms of their immediate ends and immediate means, and nothing kind of in the middle, which I view as a problem. So really, it just comes down to, I guess, being more nuanced and things, which I now know is just kind of, I guess, so much discussion now is like, there's people that even, people that I guess go, off the rails on both sides of anything, and that kind of gets the attention. But then there's almost like this whole second layer of content and people that, talk, that are just kind of these like nuancers, that they, pretty much enter into a discussion to say nothing. Like they enter into a discussion to then go, well, there's a gray area, there's nuance here, and it's really about just, looking at both sides. But like that itself also adds nothing, where it's like, sure, you get like the black and you get the white, and then you get somebody that comes in there and goes, well, there's gray too. Okay, well, you didn't really add anything to this conversation. You just kind of acknowledge that there's nuance, which I suppose is helpful on a very surface level. But I feel like there's people now that make an entire living off of just saying that there's nuance in a black and white discussion. Well, it's like, well, duh, okay, but maybe let's elaborate on this gray area that you're, that you say exists. But I even noticed like somebody posted a video. I guess to be concrete here, somebody posted a video. I don't even know who it was. I don't really care. But it's somebody that I follow, and they were like, "Oh, I tried out vibe coding." And there's like opinions on it where it's like, vibe coding is the future, or like vibe coding is meaningless, you shouldn't do it. This guy pretty much had like, however long his video was, I didn't even watch the whole thing, but it pretty much said that like, yeah, you just gotta like, have some nuance with it. Maybe it's not the future, but like, it's pretty helpful, and like, yeah, it's like, okay, that's kind of meaningless. Like, why did you need to make this video just to say that like, it's kind of, halvesies? Well, duh, okay, but is there anything beyond like, there's kind of an argument to both sides that, you have to say? Otherwise, like, why did you even make the video? Like, this video says nothing. It says that there's like both sides have a point. Okay, but where's your, where do you stand on this? Besides like both sides have a point, it's not really a position, right? I feel like that's just kind of the the Switzerland default mode of being now, where because people are too scared to give their own opinions, they just kind of validate both sides and they just kind of stand there, which I don't really think is, that doesn't really help. And well, it's not being actively antagonistic and is not unhelpful. I almost would say it is unhelpful in the sense that it doesn't move anywhere. It doesn't move anything, move any argument in a direction towards, even finding middle ground. Because if you just acknowledge that both sides have a point, and then you don't position yourself, or you don't, at least make maybe an argument towards one side over the other, you're just kind of, again, you're just being kind of an empty vessel that acknowledges nuance without adding anything to the discussion. So I would, I suppose the video would have made more sense if they were like, oh, I have vibe coding, but maybe like it doesn't or it shouldn't apply to like XYZ, but it's good for, ABC. Okay, well then maybe there's like, that's a little bit more helpful in the sense that there's not you're then kind of clearing up, a specific area, of lack of nuance. Whereas before you're just saying, well, there's, it's good and bad. All right, well, everything is good and bad, you idiot. Tell me specifically what might be good or specifically what might be bad, beyond just like, something, beyond just being vague, which I think is kind of just annoying. So I don't know. I think something maybe that's emblematic or applicable to more areas than, obviously just vibe coding. But, in general, like maybe it would have been helpful to say, okay, if you're doing web development, vibe coding is great. I would highly recommend it for this, or if you're, doing, C programming, I probably would avoid it. Or if you're using Rust, I probably wouldn't use it. Okay, that's maybe more helpful than just saying, there's goods and bad to it. It's okay. Well, that is true of anything. Anything can be good or bad. Cyanide or other poisons, are good and bad depending on the context. I'm sure there are medical applications of certain things that, just saying there's nuance is not really an opinion. That's just kind of avoiding the conversation. So I don't know. Anyway, I'll move on to something else. MBA degrees. The whole concept of a master's degree is interesting, or other any kind of equivalent advanced degree. And this is just a discussion more on degrees as a whole, but the master's degree itself does kind of, I guess, have its own space within my book of opinions. And the MBA is something that has kind of ruined that. Because you see these advertised, at least if you live in the United States, you see master's degrees advertised everywhere because they're a huge moneymaker for universities and they don't really require that much. And people will pay out the ass for them. And the unfortunate thing is, for MBAs especially, you don't learn anything, as a MBA. At least you don't learn anything that isn't already immediately intuitive or something you couldn't learn on your own for nothing. But companies will pay a premium to people that get these MBAs, and so then they become financially worth it. For some people, I suppose from some universities. Otherwise, many of them not. But the ones who are clever enough or smart enough to know whether or not to get one, they do kind of, I suppose, make sense financially. But it's kind of an insult to the whole concept of like becoming a master of anything or to study something deeper. Um, Pedagogically, I'm saying, because it, again, implicitly teaches you nothing and is only there for people to then kind of ask more money from their company. As opposed to like maybe other master's degrees where it's like Master of Fine Arts or Masters of Science, where you're there to kind of go in depth into something or to at least become, again, more of a master in any sense. Where I don't think kind of a vague, and maybe this is true of Masters of Fine Arts too, where you're not there to really go deeper into anything, or be more of an expert in anything. You're still kind of a layman in any vague sense. And so now that like I guess this whole like, and again, maybe I'm just kind of venerating a previous decade or I guess period of time where I guess advanced degrees were more like advanced degrees and not just like I guess money making schemes for universities that now kind of operate closer to businesses than they do to I guess places of institution. And maybe it just boils down to the point of an academic institution in the first place. What is the point? Is the point to produce people that can make more money? or is the point to create, as the Aristotelian view or the Socratean view would be to create virtuous citizens who are more capable, than their predecessors? That would be the purpose of an education system. Or is it people just, to make people that make more money, which I think is, overly reductive and not shouldn't be the view or shouldn't be the purpose of education. But MBAs, I think, are the ultimate insult to academia because they truly don't make anybody more capable at all in any practical sense. They make people who are more able to see things as finance and business opportunities than they would. No one comes out of an MBA program as a more well-rounded person, or as someone who can see more nuance in a situation. Maybe they just see more money in a situation. That's the only thing they're really capable of seeing post MBA. But it just that more than anything, as a degree program, I'll say, does really frustrate me as something that people do, and I guess invest time in. And I can't ever fault anybody, for thinking that it's worthwhile because they just get duped into the marketing of the whole thing. But I don't know. MBAs are just unbelievably worthless to me, and it just I don't know. It frustrates me as something that exists. I have more to say on this, and I didn't really put together a coherent argument on why it was particularly bad. I suppose, but I just hate MBAs. Period. Um, yeah. The other thing about this is just kind of, I guess, the way that the culture in the world is moving towards as well is because technology has allowed, I guess, the top 1% of things to be more accessible. So we'll even say like the top 1% of, doctors and something are far more accessible now than they were at any point in history. Because, we have travel. Let's say the top 1% doctor, the number one doctor was, in Uzbekistan, 100 years ago. And you couldn't really get there because it was pretty hard. You had to there wasn't cheap plane travel. You couldn't just book a flight and get out there. Or they couldn't book a flight and just get over to wherever you are. Whereas now everybody is much more accessible than they were, you know, however long ago. But this also kind of extends in other realms. So even like the best athletes in a certain area weren't, they were kind of localized to their vicinity, and you could play it, as the best athlete in your area. But now it's like you have to be the top 1% to be accessible to the whole world. And sure, that does kind of this consolidation of talent in every field is nice that like we're kind of democratizing this top 1% to things, but it also kind of then leaves out people who aren't the top 1% in anything. So if you aren't the top 1% in your field, you are kind of pushed out, or at least you have less of a chance to, maybe make what you would be. Let's say you're the 80th percentile in whatever you're doing. Um, the ability for you to make 80% of your, I'll say your keep is much less now because the top 1% is now taking more. So we're almost kind of moving away from this, I'll say like, democratic distribution of things where if you're the 60th percentile doctor, you make the 60th percentile, income, we'll say, or keep, I suppose income is one way to look at it. Whereas now I think the top 1% is going to get much more than, their 1% allotment of clients, which maybe they should, because they're better. But should 1% of the doctors make 100% of the money? No. Should they make 99% of the money? Probably not. Should they make 80% of the money? I mean, okay, but that still seems a little unfair and, is asking a lot of them. Surely there's some, middle ground between, the top 1% of, anything, taking up too much of the market and kind of pushing other players out. Because the way I see myself, and maybe many people see themselves in this way, is they're not, they're good at things. It's not like I am void of talent in any conceivable notion. It's not like I'm a dud in every way, but I'm not really like number one or like top 1% in anything. I'm not like the absolute best. Because even like something as stupid as this dumbass little podcast, is this top 1%? No. Okay, maybe you could even argue that it's like bottom 1%. Fine, okay. Um, but suppose again in some hypothetical world that this podcast is 55%. Um, but there's almost this I'll say like motion to kind of get rid of things that aren't the best of the best, and people don't only ever want best of the best because the best of the best is more accessible now than it ever has been. So things that aren't maybe are 80% of the way there or 60% of the way there are seen as pointless and useless because they're not best of the best. Even like something as silly as being a basketball player or an athlete of some kind. Now if you're not like gonna go professional, it's almost like, well, why are you even playing, you idiot? You're not the best. You're stupid. You're wasting your time because there's no money to be. It's not a fruitful endeavor for you. If you're not like gonna be the best podcast, what's the point of even doing it? It's like, well, you don't have to do everything to be the best at it. I feel like there's almost this toxicity of ambition now prevalent in our society where if you're not aspiring to be the absolute best in the whole world, you shouldn't bother to do anything at all, which I think is kind of stupid. It's like there's no glory or there's nothing good to be, to being just kind of like good enough at something or, proficient, we'll say. Whereas like let's say I wanted to be like an artist in some way, there's almost some shame in not wanting to be the best artist of all time, whereas you could just be like somebody that draws for themselves. And it's one thing to kind of to talk about hobbies in this way because I think people have sympathy for artists who are just hobbyists who want to create art in their free time and do whatever, or play basketball in their free time. That's no one's really shunning people like that, as whatever. But even when it comes to their livelihoods, especially when it comes to their livelihoods, people are seen as now like having to be the best of the best. Like they have to be the best investor. They have to be the best doctor. They can't just be like, I'm like an average doctor, and I just want to be an average. I don't want to be. I don't really aspire to be this like all-time greatest of all, the best of the best, the number one in my field. Only because there's other things that interest me. I'm a doctor that might want to be, dabble in, art and dabble in music and things. And sure, I'm not going to be the greatest at any one of those things, but it's almost seem as worthless if I'm not pursuing one thing with this incredible amount of focus. And because I've even mentioned that like people who, have, I'll say, maybe not aren't artistic, but have autistic tendencies towards things where they're able to dedicate an inordinate amount of time and focus into one particular thing that other people just don't really have that level of interest or you could say dedication or I could just say interest. They're then seen as like inferior or as bad. And I think as society then continues to consolidate people into kind of rewarding this higher and higher echelons of you know whoever it is, whether it's doctors or podcasters or athletes or whoever, you then kind of push out the rest of the people who then don't see it. You're not rewarding them as being fruitful for being just at 80% proficient at something or not being the best of the best. I don't know. There's just kind of this uh, I don't know. I guess outcasting of things or hobbies or just ways to spend your time if you're not going to be the best of all time, and the greatest at something. There's just kind of almost this level of shame and guilt that you feel if you're pursuing something knowing that you're not going to take it, to the extreme and be the best. And maybe that's kind of something that the internet has done, and it certainly is something that the internet has done, but that the internet only proliferates kind of these top one percenters. And as somebody who's, I'll say, is maybe proudly not in the top 1% of everything or anything really, it kind of sucks that there isn't much left for someone who isn't the absolute best at something. So um, I don't know. I feel like in a prior era, there was much more available for someone who was at the 80th percentile or 60th percentile or even the bottom 20th percentile. So maybe it's even just pulling that ladder up that is the root of my frustration. So it's not even that like you can still be the top 80th, or 80th percentile at something and I guess make a living out of it, but you can't now be, the bottom 20, which some people might see as a good thing, whereas you can't like they're pulling the ladder up where the stakes are higher or there's a higher threshold in order for you to be in order for you to participate in something, right? You have to be a better baseline athlete to be able to play the game at all. But on some level, you begin to exclude, um, I don't know, people that aren't, that don't have to take it as serious. I don't think everything has to be about performance. And there's a certain, especially when it comes to things like music or art or even something as dumb as this stupid fucking podcast, you can call it this. You don't have to be the best at something. You don't have to be a certain level of optimized or have a certain metrics of performance to exist. You can just you should just be allowed to make it because you want to do it, and play because you want to play, and make music because you want to make music, not because you have any delusions or any ambitions of grandeur. You should just be able to do it because you kind of like the process. And on some level, I'm not saying you should be, you should be able to make a living off of something. But I feel like you should be able to make a living in this world without being the best at whatever it is that you're doing, right? I feel like you don't have to be the greatest of all time to be able to make a living. Whereas I feel like that is kind of the direction that culture and society is moving towards, is only rewarding the best of the absolute best, and not kind of just rewarding or not even compensate, not even say rewarding, but not even compensating people that aren't the greatest in their field. And not to say that we should reward mediocrity and that we shouldn't strive for greatness, but the idea that we should only compensate, you know, I guess the top 1% of everything. And maybe I don't fully believe this, because I do think there is some pride in being excellent at something. But I feel like people should be able to exist and to live an okay life without being, without having to dedicate every little inch and morsel of their being towards, their stupid career. And people don't have to care about their careers above all else. That shouldn't be the mode of existence. Maybe that's just my real frustration on the matter. But anyway, I'll leave that for another time. So thanks for watching and peace out.